The United States needs to figure out what it wants. Do we just want to spend $1 trillion on our military budget? Or do we not want to have our children and our loved ones die of cancer? I know which one I want. So Trump's EPA just ended restrictions on PFAS in our drinking water. There's a lot of people that will come in my comments that say like, oh, well, they want to kill us. They want to keep us sick, and I don't necessarily agree with it. But honestly, when you see an action like this, I can see why people would say that. Part of the Clean Water Act is that when there are chemicals that we discover are toxic and are contaminating our drinking water, showering in it, the EPA does years of research and then determines whether or not to put restrictions on them in our water. Last year, after dragging its feet for over a decade, the EPA announced that there would be limits on the amount of PFAS in our drinking water. This was a massive deal. This represented one of the biggest advancements towards fixing the health of Americans, 60% of which are living with chronic disease, ever in history, right? PFAS are estimated to cost the United States upwards to $62.6 billion every single year, and all of the associated costs because it causes so many diseases, disorders, and an overall loss of productivity that come from being sick with PFAS, okay? PFAS are known as that toxic forever chemical. There's over 10,000 different kinds. It's a class of them, per and polyfluoroalkyl alkyl substances. None of them are naturally occurring. They will never break down in the environment. They've been dumped in the environment for the past 70 years by DuPont, 3M, and lots of other companies, many of whom now have employees working in the Trump administration. PFAS are definitively linked to lots of different types of cancer and death. Every tiny little bit that you ingest will build up in your brain. They can stay in your body. They will stay there for upwards to 10 years. There is no official way to break them down in the environment or our body yet, although there have been lots of technological advances recently. So this is why it was a really big deal when last year the EPA announced that they would be putting restrictions on them in our drinking water, okay? What this meant is that municipalities would have to update their extremely old and aging water treatment facilities in order to filter out the PFAS. But Biden included lots of grants and funding to help communities do that, especially really poor ones, making sure that they would have lots of money in order to do this. But the chemical manufacturers themselves would also be contributing lots of money towards fixing our water infrastructure because there have been so many class action lawsuits and settlements across the country because these manufacturers have polluted the entire world with these toxic chemicals. However, the chemical manufacturers and lots of Republicans, they teamed up together to fight these regulations, and Trump vowed to take them away once elected. And so that's what he's doing, right? Here's what Trump's EPA did, okay? PFAS drinking water restrictions were put on 6 PFAS compounds, okay? So Trump's EPA administrator pushed back the date for 2 of these PFAS, right? This would be the date that they would need to be filtered out by municipalities. He pushed that back by a few years. I doubt those will ever go into place, okay? But he also completely rescinded the restrictions for 4 PFAS compounds, meaning it's a free-for-all. They are now completely allowed in our water, and they always will be until maybe a Democrat comes into office. But these are the 4 compounds that there are no restrictions on now, right? PFHXS, which causes brain cancer, PFNA, which causes mouth and throat cancer, Gen X, which causes liver, pancreas, and testicular cancer, and PFBS, which in animal studies has shown to negatively impact the thyroid, reproductive organs, tissues, developing fetus, and kidney following oral exposures. Okay? But the argument by Republicans and chemical trade associations is that it's just too expensive to filter out PFAS from our drinking water. The EPA estimated that it would cost $1.548 billion last year to upgrade our water infrastructure and to filter out those PFAS, right? That's what they said. But the EPA also estimated that it would save communities $1.549 billion every year because it would be preventing diseases, preventing deaths, and making people healthy healthier. And that makes people better workers, harder workers. And Biden, again, he'd also allocated tons of money that was already part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill to help pay for all of this. But Trump has since removed all those funds. Here's a quick recap on all the diseases and disorders that PFAS cause, and what that costs us as a society, right? So PFAS unequivocally cause many different types of cancer and at minimum, 7,000 deaths every single year. PFAS cause childhood obesity. That's estimated to cost the U.S. $2.65 billion a year. PFAS cause gestational diabetes. That's $414 million a year. PFAS cause adult obesity, and that costs the U.S. $17 billion a year. PFAS cause kidney cancer. That's $180 million a year. PFAS cause infertility. That costs the U.S. $37.6 million a year. PFAS cause hypothyroidism. That costs the United States $1.26 billion per year. Breast cancer, type 2 diabetes, testicular cancer, endometriosis, PCOS, the list goes on and on. Meanwhile, the Republicans have now proposed to increase the military budget by $150 billion this year, bringing the total proposed defense budget for fiscal 2025 to over $1 trillion. But we can't pay to have clean drinking water so our kids don't get cancer. RFK Jr. is over here saying that he's going to tackle the chronic disease epidemic while also cutting almost $2 billion from Health and Human Services and repealing these PFAS restrictions. And he has been a huge advocate for restricting PFAS and putting PFAS regulations in place. Yet here he is going against everything he believes in, being a hypocrite and going against that, right? Right now, the U.S. is having an identity crisis, right? Or at least the government is. I think United States citizens believe that every person deserves to have clean drinking water, right? Certainly the United States was celebrated around the world when it created the EPA in the 70s under a Republican president, Nixon, and declared that clean water was a human right. We knew all of this was coming. We saw this during the first Trump administration when he greenlit and put way more PFAS in our water supply. He rolled back hundreds of different environmental protections, including water regulations, and he's doing it again. And we saw this coming from a mile away. I'm honestly surprised it didn't happen sooner and why he waited, almost 5 months into his presidency to do it.